Introducing LearnCraft Spanish. Join us on a rigorous step-by-step journey to fluency. I'm Timothy, and this is LearnCraft Spanish. Welcome to LearnCraft Spanish, the world's first guaranteed step-by-step system for becoming fluent in Spanish as a second language. I'm Timothy, and I'm really excited that you're serious about becoming fluent in Spanish, but I'm even more excited that you've found the only program that you'll ever need to learn to speak and understand Spanish like a native speaker. Since 2014, my team and I have been the world's leaders in getting people fluent in Spanish. In our premier coaching program, we've proven again and again that it is possible to bring adult English speakers to fluency all the way from no knowledge of Spanish to being able to carry an intelligent conversation with a native speaker on virtually any subject, express anything you want to say in a way that a native speaker might say it, and understand 90% of written or spoken Spanish. If you have native Spanish speakers in your life and want to connect with them not superficially, but deeply and personally, you're in the right place. This podcast summarizes all of the methods we've developed over the last decade, and I'm thrilled to be able to share them with the world through this show. Most importantly, unlike any other language learning course or podcast you'll find, this one is tested for results and focused on genuine fluency. Everything we teach you will have you thinking in Spanish in a matter of weeks, and from there, sounding more and more like a native speaker every day. Vocabulary will always make contextual sense. Grammar rules will always integrate with what you already know so that you can naturally use them. Every new word will fit into a fabric that'll quickly grow and develop into your Spanish voice so that you can speak idiomatically faster than ever. Now, all of this assumes that you're actually doing the work step by step, starting from the foundations and diligently working your way up. So before we dive into the lessons, we need to start by covering something more important than learning any vocabulary or grammar rules. We actually have to talk about the mindset of a serious language learner. Please stick through this episode because this is what makes the whole rest of the show make sense. I'll start by covering the importance of sticking to the system. Then I'll talk a little bit about our techniques so that you can understand what makes these Spanish lessons different from anything else you've tried. And then finally, I'll talk about the expectations that we have for you as a student if you want to see the best results that our methods can give you. First of all, let's clarify how important it is to follow and trust the system as you go through this podcast one episode at a time. So if you're impatient and you want to learn how to say the Spanish word for tree or napkin right away, this isn't the podcast for you. Because in order to speak like a native Spanish speaker deeply and comfortably, we have to actively avoid entertaining ourselves with trivial vocabulary that doesn't help us with our serious learning goals. There are some very core language elements to focus on exclusively first. Most language learning courses fall short here, and you've probably experienced this yourself. Just as an example, thousands of English speakers know how to say donkey in Spanish, but don't even understand how to find a proper equivalent for the English word it. Then, once they do learn how to say, for example, the direct object word for the word it, they simply start replacing the word it in English sentence structures, instead of using it the way a native Spanish speaker would, which is completely wrong and can even make what they say unintelligible in Spanish. Not anymore, not on this podcast. Every single word you learn will fit perfectly into a natural sentence construct, an idiomatic way of speaking, which will become second nature faster than you ever thought possible thanks to our unique learning system. This revolutionary system has a long background of development involving years of experimentation and focused one-on-one work with thousands of coaching students. But I'll summarize the system very briefly in this episode so that you know what to expect. Basically, the only way to make Spanish second nature is to train yourself to think in Spanish as early as possible. And this requires rigorous, effortful, active work on some specific core language skills. There are a lot of podcasts and courses out there that you can use for entertainment, but But if you truly want to achieve Spanish as a second language so that you can make deep personal connections with native Spanish speakers, this podcast will guide you through the hard work that this requires. And specifically, that hard work means rethinking what shortcuts are. In our system, we do believe in taking shortcuts, but our definition of shortcuts is very different from what you might expect. So let's think about what literal shortcuts are like. Imagine that language learning is like trekking through a jungle, and fluency is a destination off in the distance on the opposite edge of the map. Now let's say that there's a giant mountain standing between you and fluency, a treacherous, steep mountain that would be very difficult to climb straight over. Maybe for you right now, that mountain is irregular verb conjugations, or pronominal structures, or subjunctives. Just imagine something really big and difficult in Spanish, something that's actually used all the time by native speakers, but that would be really difficult for you to master right now. Now, in this situation, what do you think the shortcut to fluency is? Of course, what most learners naturally want to do is try to find a way to avoid the mountain by taking the easy downhill paths away from it. But if you want to shortcut your way to fluency, the shortest path actually cuts straight through the mountain. Shortcuts go straight through the hard stuff. So at LearnCraft, we believe in cutting straight to some of the most difficult learning, and that's because we've found that it's both the fastest and the most fulfilling way to learn. Imagine confronting your biggest weakness in Spanish and deciding to work straight through it, applying yourself rigorously until that skill becomes second nature. Then what? Then you're at the top of the mountain. You basically never have to worry about this obstacle again, and your learning is downhill from there. That's what a true learning shortcut feels like. So in this course, we're going to start with some of the hardest stuff in Spanish, the essential sentence structures, pronouns, prepositions, irregular verb conjugations, and basically all the things that make the Spanish language what it is. We'll give you the system you need to master all of these foundations until they're second nature, so that in a matter of weeks, you'll actually be thinking in Spanish. After that's established, when we get to learning the vocabulary that fits into those sentence constructs and idioms, we'll start at the top of the frequency list and actually learn all the words you need to get to that 90% level of comprehension and to enable you to express literally anything you want to express in Spanish as if you were a native speaker. For example, after a few months on this podcast, you still won't know the Spanish word for printer. However, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to mention an office printer, you'll be able to describe this thing as a native speaker would, and then ask, as a native speaker might, what the thing is called. And then, if there's a new word, that'll give you an easier way to say it in the future. See, we're empowering you to speak in a way that'll truly scale. We don't believe in dead ends, which is where almost any other language learning method will eventually lead you. Now, of course, this is just a podcast, and I can't promise that just by putting this show in your ears every day, you'll learn much of anything. You have to do some serious, active work to internalize anything you learn, and that's particularly true of language. So I recommend treating this podcast as basically a virtual coach. We'll provide specific instructions on how to make the best use of every single episode, and your job is to do the rigorous, active work yourself, including speaking out loud at every chance you get. For example, in almost every episode, there'll be multiple opportunities to try to predict the Spanish that you're about to hear based on an English sentence. You'll learn fastest if you take every opportunity to predict the Spanish that you're about to hear out loud. And then, whenever you hear a Spanish sentence, speak it out loud, trying to imitate exactly what you hear. It might not seem that big a deal to speak out loud while listening to this podcast, but it will make a night and day difference in your learning. By doing not only the mental work, but the actual physical work of speaking Spanish out loud, you'll find yourself speaking fluidly faster than you ever thought possible. Now, even if you do speak out loud faithfully, imitating exactly what you hear on the podcast, you shouldn't just depend on imitation. One of the most important objectives on the road to fluency is spontaneous production. You need to be able to make up your own sentences on the fly in a smooth and spontaneous way. So on this show, we won't just give you opportunities to imitate scripted Spanish sentences out loud. We'll also help you try to practice changing those sentences and making them your own. One of the ways we'll do this is to provide a multitude of sentence examples that are really bizarre and random. And in every case, you should try to predict the Spanish no matter how weird the sentence sounds. If you do, you'll find yourself getting faster and faster at creating Spanish sentences on the fly until you can say practically anything you want to say in accurate Spanish, with all the sentence structures and idioms so second nature that you're actually thinking in Spanish. Now, of course, this podcast is only an audio version of our full course. We'll provide everything we can in this podcast format. But as you'll see very quickly, there are other things that simply can't be provided through a podcast, such as visuals, quizzes, and written study materials, all of which you'll need to master sooner or later. But those are all available if you go to lcspodcast.com. And of course, if you're a serious language learner and are interested in genuine fluency, you should seriously consider getting live, face-to-face coaching that's in line with the program to help make sure that you're practicing everything correctly and to work rigorously through your weaknesses. Fortunately, LearnCraft Spanish provides that as well at lcspodcast.com. If you choose the private coaching track, our promise is that we will bring you to full fluency one step at a time. Your native-speaking coaches and I will be with you at every step of the way to keep you on track and to practice with you regularly. We'll be 100% dedicated to helping you meet your fluency goal because your Spanish success story is what keeps us going. Of course, you're welcome to just listen to this podcast and learn the language that way. Even with just this free version of the course, you'll be amazed at how quickly you can learn to speak and understand authentic Spanish. So one way or another, prepare to be blown away at how fun and effective it is to learn a language through serious work on the essentials. We have it all prepared for you, so keep listening and be inspired by what your own mind is able to do. We'll begin with some foundational grammar tomorrow. This show is brought to you by LearnCraftSpanish.com. Music for this episode was provided by the Seattle Marimba Quartet, and I'm Timothy, encouraging you to do the hard work of learning Spanish. Acquiring a second language is one of the most fulfilling things you can do, so start your fluency journey today at lcspodcast.com.